So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Zimmer. I work at Climate-KIC. I'm based in France, and I have the pleasure to welcoming you to the third of our dialogue series on landscape finance on behalf of our co-conveners of the 1000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People, the IKEA and Laudes Foundations, and of the organizers, Eco-Agriculture Partners, Climate-KIC, Common Land, Regenerative Development Group, and Rainforest Alliance. For those of you who are new to the dialogue series, 1000 Landscapes is a radical collaboration of change agents working together to accelerate landscape efforts to sustain and restore ecosystems, to build rural prosperity, and address climate change. Our focus is on strengthening capacities of landscape partnerships, helping them build coalitions to influence policy, bringing the information technology revolution to meet landscape priorities, and mobilizing finance. We are co-designing and testing innovations, working directly in 22 landscapes, and developing a partnership network to help 1000 landscape partnerships scaling their impacts by 2030. One of the greatest challenges for landscape partnerships is to mobilize financial resources for the key projects needed for landscape transformation. But we also observe that there is a growing flow of international finance for climate, for regenerative agriculture, water, biodiversity that has a difficult time reaching the ground. Integrated landscape finance provides a potentially powerful solution to connect the dots. A centerpiece of 1000 Landscape is seeking to catalyze ways to bridge the finance gap. So with these few words of introduction, and before moving forward, I will also give you a few housekeeping advice and technical notes. So first of all, could you please make sure that your name and your organization are properly noted? You can change that in the Participants tab at the bottom of your screen under Rename. Chat, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name and organization, and any particular interest you have in this finance theme. Also, feel free to use the chat for comments, questions for the speakers, or to share relevant resource materials. In the second half of the dialogue, we'll invite you to participate in a Zoom whiteboard. So the whiteboard will appear automatically on your screen, and Shannon from our team will explain how to use the board in more detail later. For now, you are all muted, and we ask that you stay muted throughout the duration of the initial presentations. When we come to the moderated discussion section of our event, you may raise your hand using the Zoom function. Our moderators will then call on you, and then you can unmute yourselves. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Sarah Scher, President and CEO of Eco-Agriculture Partners, and also chair of the 1000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People, and co-lead of the Finance System Transformation Workstream, together with me. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and welcome to all of you who are here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For some of you who may not have been in the first dialogues, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes providing an overview again of what we've been trying to achieve here. The objectives of this three dialogue set is to bring together landscape initiatives together with the folks who are or could potentially be financing the activities in their landscapes, to generate ideas for catalytic action in the landscape finance system, and to identify opportunities to advance these ideas. If we go to the next slide, Lily. The focus of our first dialogue was on the role of landscape partnerships themselves in mobilizing finance to introducing their portfolios of investments for landscape regeneration. What do they need? The second dialogue brought in the funder's perspective more explicitly in terms of looking at how we're funding private and public projects within these investment portfolios. What are some of the new models that have been developed to do that? And this third dialogue is going to bring these two together and say, where are the gaps to make this finance system work much more effectively with everyone? What are some of the new strategies for collaboration that could catapult this whole area of finance forward in the next couple of years? You'll go to the next slide. The agenda that we have today is first a brief review of the high-level learnings, challenges, and opportunities that emerged from the first two dialogues. We're then going to look at the picture of the landscape finance system as a whole towards which we think we're trying to move. And then we'll have a period for sharing the ideas on gaps and opportunities through our panel, and who will be presenting groups from our partners in 1000 Landscapes who've been focusing hard the last few years on the finance challenge, and then work together as a group to generate ideas for catalytic action and some very concrete specific steps that we can have moving forward. So before I move on to Karishma to host our panel, let me first remind you of some of the highlights of the finance dialogues earlier. One of the elements has to do with just in terms of general observations that we had about what was going on is we've seen very rapid growth in landscape partnerships and very diverse kinds of projects to be invested in, highly creative systems being put in place to pull those together, institutional innovations to do that. We did find that development takes time, that there's a whole critical process of funding to get the funding activities in place to deliver the level of financial resources that are required, which fell in a typical landscape into the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars that were required for diverse set of investments that were needed to produce the synergies that would really generate regenerative transformation. We also have saw a lot of innovation in finance mechanisms. On the other hand, we saw some very important challenges. The sector overall is quite immature, and that's reflected in a weak integration of the landscape projects themselves within a landscape, weak integration among the financial actors. We see traditional mindsets on the part of both the landscape partnership leaders and the financiers trying to do things in the old way and not really addressing this new challenge of integrating action from multiple major objectives from the land use, from the land and resource base. We see inadequate de-risking, weak capacity of various kinds of organizations to do this kind of work. We don't have a taxonomy that makes it easy to communicate with one another and to understand the quality of projects when they come in, and overall monitoring and impact assessment is weak. On the other hand, there's a number of important opportunities that we identified. First of all, by using landscape approaches that conjunctively address global issues like climate, water, regenerative agriculture, food security, biodiversity, it's actually can potentially be a much more productive and impactful approach than looking at siloed investment flows. We saw some really inspiring portfolios in some of these landscape initiatives that seemed really catalytic. We also found many opportunities where grant and public funding could leverage private investment, and we found many rich learnings to already start to disseminate to help groups around the world learn how to do this process more effectively. And we see a lot of potential to link the innovators in a way that could lead to an accelerated change in the system. So let me look at the last slide here and say where we think we're going in terms of the landscape finance map. When we looked at the whole system and the barriers, et cetera, we identified three main buckets. First of all, the demand for landscape finance, the supply of landscape finance, and the tools and methods needed for them to operate efficiently and with impacts at scale. And what we saw is that all of these pieces need to be in place for the system to run smoothly. On the demand side, we need institutionalized support services for landscape partnerships to support them in the investment planning, the design of financial mechanisms, et cetera. We need a much more structured and accessible pipeline of investable projects that are written up and described in a way that facilitates communication between those implementing the projects and those potentially financing them. We would also see very strong government enabling investments and enabling policies. These are all things that we see very erratically in general. In terms of where we want to be going for supply, financial institutions themselves need to be well equipped and have strong capacities and tools to undertake landscape finance assessments and landscape finance flows. We need to have direct mechanisms for financings to connect to the pipelines of projects that are out there of different types, whether it's equity, debt, grants, loans, government projects, whatever it might be. And we need mechanisms that will help to coordinate finance action within the landscapes so these processes move more smoothly and the complementary financial needs are met. And finally, we would see in a more mature finance system accessible finance and risk mechanisms for diverse contexts in the world. We would see landscape finance being quite accessible, very clear and open information sharing, and we would see well-developed data and tools that would make it easy to slot activities into landscape finance programs and to slot landscape finance into larger financial flows that may have been structured from different kinds of sectoral sources. So I think with that kind of overview, what I'd like to do now is introduce Karishma Shilar, the Senior Program Manager of Rural Futures at Well Labs and a member of the 1000 Landscapes Finance team to host this next segment of our day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Today we have with us a panel of 4 speakers and who are all members of the 1000 Landscapes Finance team. We have John Luis Robabe of the Regenerative Development Group. We've got Alejandro Diaz of Common Land, Seth Seamus with Eco-Agriculture Partners, and Caroline Van Leenders of the Government of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. Each of our panelists today will talk about a specific issue that has emerged as a potential area for future collaborative work. The objective here is to be able to catalyze greater investment in landscape transformation. Just a note here, please direct all our questions to the panelists using the chat function. We will also have some space for you to react to some of the comments and suggestions, discussions made by the panelists in the whiteboard as part of a moderated discussion which will follow this panel. First, I'd like to introduce John Luis, who will now speak about supporting landscape partnerships to develop investment portfolios. Over to you, John.
Yes, thank you so much, Karishma. I'm very, very happy to be here alongside partners and colleagues and with all of you to discuss strategies to accelerate investments in sustainable landscapes. So I'll spend 3-4 minutes addressing the demand side of financing sustainable landscapes, which is basically about how landscape partners can help catalyze financial flows and instruments in support of their goals, and how do we structure collaborations in order to help them do so. And to illustrate this theme, I will use an example from what we're calling the Landscape Finance Accelerator, which is an initiative of 1000 Landscapes that involves a number of partners. And specifically, over the past year or so, Eco-Agriculture Partners, the Rainforest Alliance, SNV, the Sustainable Finance Coalition, and my own organization, the Regenerative Development Group, I've been working across a number of landscapes and more deeply in Mexico, Vietnam, and Malawi to map priority projects and to understand what are the current and needed financial flows and how do we develop financial solutions that are uniquely suited to meet the needs of those landscapes. And those of you who participated in previous dialogues may have had a chance to learn a bit about these landscapes already, so I won't go back to that. But for the purpose of this meeting, I want to highlight a few key learnings that we're gathering from these initiatives and hoping that they can be a good prompt for the dialogue and for the conversation. So specifically, I think 3 things that we're learning through this process is first, the value of meeting landscapes where they are. Second, how this process of the accelerator is helping to develop what we're calling these project portfolios, and how that is helping to take us beyond what is a more traditional project or value chain based approach. And then third, how this process is really helping to start thinking about integrated landscape finance mechanisms that again are starting to take us beyond the more traditional value chain and project-oriented instruments. And so I'll just say a few words about these three kind of learnings. So first of all, the value of meeting landscapes where they are. I think all of us who work in this sector feel a real sense of urgency, and we want to be bold and ambitious. We have major crises on our hands, and we're eager to develop transformative solutions. The reality is that these solutions need to be grounded in the real world, and they need to be supportive of how they might play out in context, and how they support the development of these projects as they are today. And with the accelerator process, I think what we found is that it's helped us create with landscape partners very strong baselines that both take into account the long-term vision of these landscapes and the long-term vision in terms of landscape restoration or regenerative agriculture or water flows or whatever the goals of the landscape are, but also to ground ourselves in the current stage of development of this project. And this, in turn, is allowing us to deeply contextualize the need for finance and the types of finance that can be activated right now, and how that might evolve over time. And I'll say a few more words about that later, and I know Alejandro is going to address that as well. And so I think by meeting landscapes where they are, we're able to both retain the highest ambition of those landscapes, while at the same time avoiding the risk of developing models that are not aligned with current needs. And this, we believe, is a powerful recipe for activating the right kind of finance at the right time. The second point is about the emergence of what we're calling these landscape project portfolios. We know we need to move beyond single projects, and integrated landscape management offers the opportunity to do so. I think one of the key benefits of using a landscape approach is to develop a holistic understanding of what is happening and what needs to happen in this landscape. And what we're seeing with the accelerator process is truly the emergence of these very rich project portfolios. So, for instance, in Malawi, we've mapped projects around 8 different value chains, all at different stages of development, all with very different financial needs. And that is allowing us to truly develop this portfolio view of the landscape and to take us beyond these single value chains. And out of that, we're seeing the potential, and that is...
May I request you to wrap up in about 30 seconds?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think out of that, we're really seeing the emergence and the potential of developing this integrated financial instrument. And so just to take a couple of examples, in Malawi, around the Mount Mulanje biosphere, we've now identified a number of what we might call green infrastructure projects, very large ones. They touch on water, they touch on energy, they touch on biodiversity. And collectively, these projects have investment needs in the tens of millions of dollars. And out of that process, we're now building a portfolio around which to develop what we're calling a landscape bond, which could attract tens of millions and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to truly support large-scale projects at a landscape scale. In Vietnam and in Mexico, we've identified the need for preparation funding for transitions. In both contexts, there is a need for agriculture, in particular, and agricultural practices to shift. The farmers and the smallholders are not quite ready to receive large investments, and so we're developing revolving grant facilities that could again catch tens of projects at a landscape scale with financing that is adapted to their needs. So these are just a few examples of the work that's coming out of the accelerator. So I hope this helps. Thank you, Karishma. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jean-Louis. That was very helpful. May I now introduce Alejandro Dias, who's with the Common Land, and he will now speak to us about the next generation of integrated landscape financing mechanisms. Over to you, Alejandro.
Thank you so much, Karishma, and Jean-Louis, you already raised a few very good points on the topic. So, landscape finance mechanisms. So to start off, I also wanted to remind everyone that the second dialogue, like Sarah mentioned, was focused on finance mechanisms. So I would encourage everyone to go back to the recording, go back to the presentations that have been shared. Also great insights in the first presentation from Landscape Partnership from the first dialogue. So a lot of information in there if you want to go deeper. So in the second dialogue, we had a great discussion. So this is an attempt at summarizing some of those points. So as we know, the finance mechanisms in general, when we're looking at a landscape approach, are inherently a little more complicated. They're complex, difficult to design, with consideration of all of the finance flows that are needed, going from grant funding, investment capital, and within that very early stage, high risk equity type investments, but also maybe even secured loans, and more opportunities that would be suitable for financial institutions. And addressing all of these things in tandem requires cross-sector collaboration. So from the get-go, partnerships will be critical in the design of these mechanisms. Also, as we know, given the complexity, we need to start early in throughout the design and development process. And like Tim from the Cascadia project presented, developing as you're doing and incorporating all of the actors that are participating in the landscape into the design and development activities from the get-go. We don't want to design things in isolation that are then presented and therefore then difficult to actually meet the financing needs of local actors. So let's involve everyone from the beginning. This also raises the point of resources. Of course, a little more complexity, involving all actors, being very holistic in the design requires additional costs. These costs are important also to channel in a very flexible way. So advocating, and like we heard from, I think, all of the landscape partnerships in the first dialogue we presented, advocating for largely unrestricted long-term grant funding. That will be very critical, even in this topic of landscape finance mechanisms, to get to the investment opportunities, to be able to design them and provide those very flexible resources that are needed, that are being asked for in order to get to the investable stage. And so lastly, within this topic of finance mechanisms, we hear blended finance solutions, we hear de-risking. The reality, as we look at the portfolios, is that straight commercial opportunities will be difficult. So there will have to be participation of philanthropy, public funders, in order to either lower the risk or maybe increase returns or provide that additional flexibility before we get to a stage in which this will be commercial and standardized and part of the broader financial system. So again, encourage everyone to go back to those presentations, recording, and happy to chat further. So back to you, Karishma.
Thanks a lot, Alejandro. We now move on to our next speaker, Seth Seamus, who is with Eco Agriculture. Seth will now speak to us about building a landscape investment marketplace. Seth, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Karishma, and thanks to everyone else. All right, so as we work with landscape actors and develop these investment portfolios of projects, as Jean-Louis was describing, and we work on the design of mechanisms, as Alejandro was describing. As a design team in 1,000 Landscapes, we've also been considering what else could be done to help connect supply and demand, as that diagram, as Daniel's diagram showed. So in other words, what more can be done to facilitate the exchange of information and contact and ultimately financial flows between investors and landscape projects. So this is an area that's like sort of less developed than the other ones that were described. So just to be clear, these are just some initial ideas of what we would mean when we talk about marketplace. So I'll start by saying that we don't think we're ready for a marketplace or an exchange right now. And even if we did the necessary research and decided that something like this is needed and would work, then the network within 1,000 Landscapes anyway doesn't have anything like right now the pipeline of projects that would need to be packaged in a way that would power something like this, sort of in my opinion. So the first question we should be asking is what we can do now in this space of connection, and then we can talk about like what a long-term vision could be, which could be more like an exchange or a marketplace. Before getting into those specifics, I thought it would be useful to clarify a few underlying like principles, values of work when entering into this space. And these are a few that came up for me. One about that we want to create the conditions that are as favorable as possible for the achievement of these legitimately derived landscape objectives. So this is our North Star, our being the sort of 1,000 Landscapes network, and what we feel like we're trying to serve. And hopefully by doing this, we'd also be supporting investors that have these overlapping objectives as well and building a system where they can thrive. We want to make sure we consider sources of local finance before going directly to larger national, international actors. And where it makes sense, we can think about marketing portfolios of projects together, focusing on the synergies among those potential investments and with a link towards, storytelling about these landscapes so people who are investing understand the context of what they're engaging in. All right, so as far as action, sort of shorter term action, this is what I think we'd be ready for. So one thing could be some kind of clearinghouse function. So with the work that's going on right now in the accelerator and some other clusters of landscape partnerships that are sort of part of our network that we could be engaging in directly or indirectly in the near future, this is a direction that I think that is, that's possible. So one vision for this is to work through the portfolio mapping tool that's now being developed through the Terrasso platform to display information about projects that can be searched by anyone who's interested. So this would be a service to landscape partnerships who are looking to advertise their needs. There could also be a link to a Landscale platform or a number of other platforms that are kind of gathering information about landscape partnerships and their projects. And this information can be displayed in any number of ways, and it can be tagged for people who have more specific interests. So you could have like a tag based on a type of finance, so philanthropic versus commercial, or loan versus equity. You could have tags based on project size, or even on impact goals. So like a biodiversity boosting project, or something as specific as birds, or your carbon credits, things like that. So you would have sort of the whole portfolio there, but for people who are interested in particular parts of it, they could, search for it. And then there would also be opportunities to market these portfolios sort of together, if that was of interest. And of course, this is sort of the more landscapes, the better for this. Another option that we can work on immediately is more intensive and custom, that just sort of development of investment fairs, field trips to particular landscapes that are developing these integrated sets of projects. This is something Eco-Agriculture Partners has been involved in the past, but it can be really a powerful tool, particularly if they're investors that are interested in developing closer relationships with the people in these places. All right, so as far as longer term action, a real sort of exchange marketplace, which I know there's sort of some folks are interested in, and it's a very kind of tantalizing idea. My observation of this is that these things usually don't work like on a small scale. So this is probably something that's more like years potentially in the future, or depending on what we want, what resources there are to invest in it. But you could start planning for it now if there's interest in this, with sort of some kind of no regrets type actions like developing a clearinghouse. And a clearinghouse could eventually build into something like this. But I mean, you would need, who knows what the number is, 250, 500, landscapes or something in this. I feel like for critical mass. At that point, there could be enough content for like a wide range of actors, philanthropic, commercial, et cetera. And at that point, you really can start talking about, developing financial products. You bundle up, projects from one landscape and another landscape to reduce risk, and maybe institutional investors are involved at that point. So that could be a really interesting idea. There could also be like national level versions of this, where there's a lot of active landscape partnerships. It doesn't have to be a global thing. But anyway, there's a lot of sort of, I think, thinking and research that would really have to go into this to make this work. Not something to be taken lightly. So, that's it. That's where we're on this topic, Karishma. So
thanks a lot, Seth. This was useful. We now have with us Carolyn, and Carolyn will be talking to us about how do you integrate landscape finance into the larger international finance architecture. Over to you, Carolyn.
Hi all, some familiar and some new, and thanks to 1000 Landscapes for the opportunity to share some thoughts. Yes, it's about international finance architecture, but first I want to start with something else. Biodiversity and climate adaptation are, to my opinion, the biggest challenges of our time. And see how Canada is on fire at this moment. It breaks my heart how all the trees are burning. And I think that nature-based solutions opposed to technology-based solutions are the only way out of these crises. Last December at the Nature Summit, more than 1,000 private financial institutions and companies came together in an impressive series of side events. The government's negotiations, on the other hand, were primarily focused on how to use public money for funding the biodiversity finance gap. There was very little connection between these two group of actors. They mostly operated as parallel worlds. And we all know we can't finance bending the curve on biodiversity loss with public money alone. In a new global biodiversity framework, the GBF, that was reached in Montreal, different financial targets were set with some entry points for more private finance. A new biodiversity fund will be established under the Global Environmental Fund. Blended finance has to be developed to mobilize the private financial sector, and governments are asked to develop new financial models for the implementation of the GBF. As part of the Dutch contribution to the implementation of the GBF, we commissioned a study on blended finance for nature based on 23 best practices and examples from all over the world, and there are some key messages to be learned. One is to take a whole society approach, which includes indigenous peoples, local communities, youth, women, non-governmental organizations, and local business hubs when designing the government structures for blended finance for nature. New solutions to catalyze the development of domestic blended finance should build on existing vehicle facilities and financial infrastructure relevant for a specific country. And support for capacity building and technical assistance will be needed in countries that do not have access to such capacity. I will share a link of the study or send me an email if you're interested. Maybe these recommendations sound familiar to the people of the landscape finance community that is today in this dialogue. That is not a coincidence. The reason is that many of the 23 best practices in the study take a landscape approach based on a specific biome, like coral reefs, mangroves, or even the restoration of a seascape such as the Mediterranean Sea, a great project by a big coalition led by the European Bank of Development and Reconstruction. So the coming years, all countries will have to make a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, including a finance strategy for the implementation of the GBF. And in these plans, a landscape approach in line with the needs of nature is vital, and therefore the connection to the landscape finance community. So please start the conversation with your governments in the countries in which your landscape is placed and offer them all the knowledge and practice you have developed over the last few years for setting up the right national biodiversity strategies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you to all of the panelists for walking us through some very interesting conversations and pointers on catalyzing landscape financing for transforming our landscapes. I now hand over to Daniel to take the discussion forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karishma. Indeed, with this sort of overview, we could not, of course, summarize everything that was in the previous dialogues, but we will now at least try to exchange and have a moderated discussion on particularly the need for catalytic actions to transform the landscape finance system and ideas also to make this happen. So we'll ask you to first write your ideas on our Zoom whiteboard before sharing comments out loud. Okay, I see that you have been quite active on the board. I would like to invite some of you already to share a number of ideas, and I would like to start with Samantha Power, who is founder and principal consultant in an organization called Finance for Gaia. Sounds really very interesting. Samantha, could you share some thoughts from your experience in your organization?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. And I love this approach to crowdsourcing ideas for these questions that we're all thinking about and working on. There's some incredible ideas in the Miro already. And I'm just going to share a little bit about an idea that I've been working on. And for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been advising finance ministries and investors of all shapes and sizes on how to scale up investment in restoration. And what's become clear to me is that if the growing wave of capital committing to investing in nature flows through the existing financial architecture, it's likely to lead to more privatization, corporatization, and centralization of our lands and waters. And this is really concerning me. And it's the opposite of what I believe is needed to drive real and lasting restoration, which is an expansion and a deepening of the commons. So I think it's critical that we build financial structures that can enable the decentralization of the flow of financial resources so they can more effectively reach the people on the ground doing the incredible work of stewarding our lands and waters. And I'm contributing to some research at the Buckminster Fuller Institute under the BFI Design Lab to develop a concept for bioregional funds, which would be governed at the bioregional level and would aggregate both an integrated capital portfolio and a portfolio of projects across the bioregion. Resources would be disseminated in line with a locally developed plan for regeneration. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with the Thousand Landscapes Initiative on this. And if anyone on the call wants to learn more, feel free to ping me. I can share my email in the chat. And really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Samantha. I would have a lot of questions for you, but I would also like to give the floor to Kira Gerwing. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Kira. You are the Chief Real Estate Investment Officer at Sasha Investments. What are your thoughts, Kira, on what you are hearing and what you are seeing, maybe also on the board?
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I think what we've found working in British Columbia and Alberta in Canada is that really ultimately at the end of this all, we're investing in people. And so we can talk about these structures and frameworks, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to look our investment partner in the eye and have it make sense in our head and in our heart and in our gut. So we talk about these kinds of structural approaches to investing, but at the end of the day, this is actually quite a human interaction. So when I think about what kind of actions investors can take, it actually comes down to connecting investors with the very people who are needing their investment. It becomes actually quite a human exercise. And so, finding those local champions and understanding their approach, and then finding a way to learn how to trust that their approach is in fact right for their community, for their landscape, for their bioregion. That's the way that we do it. And so the way that our investor has kind of enabled that is to put investment advisors in place. So, for example, I'm located in British Columbia and Alberta, but we've got other investment advisors elsewhere where our investor invests. And our job is to put boots on the ground and just actually get to know and connect with people who are doing the good work in the landscapes that we're mandated to invest in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very inspiring, dear Kira. I think this, you open indeed the floor to a lot of ideas on how landscapes are connectors between land uses, between issues, between people. And I think this is really something that is, of course, very important to us in the program. I would like now to just open the floor. There are many comments, I see many things already in the different sticky notes. Does everyone has an idea to share from the sticky notes? I haven't had the time, of course, to read all of them, but I could pick some. But who wants to also share their views with the group? Okay, if maybe I could read some of them. I was interested, for instance, in the one on land tenure, which for me is indeed in many areas a very big issue, because if you want indeed to have regenerative practices and to integrate things, the land tenure may be a very important issue. So who would like to comment on this comment on the sticky note? No, nobody willing to comment on this? Okay, then I would take another one, maybe. What about the financial mechanisms also that are, I see, for instance, catalytic grant financing? What is the meaning of this? How can we use grants to catalyze other financing, or to use initial grants to catalyze other funding? Any comment on this? Otherwise, I will open to Sarah. You have maybe some particular points to raise.
I really was just going to say this is really the opportunity. If there's things that are going on with your own organization or ideas you've been thinking about, would like to move forward in this area, this is a really great place to look for other folks who might want to join you on this. We've already had a few people in the other meetings, dialogues, that have suggested specific working groups that they wanted to see happen around these things, or initiatives or funds they're looking for other investors in, or whatever. But don't feel constrained about simply asking for what you'd like to see others join. And I wanted to throw one of those in there. We've been discussing at 1,000 Landscapes that this really might be a very excellent year with the climate COP coming up at the end of this year. And then the biodiversity COP, the land degradation one, happening also next year. Major advances in the UN Food Systems Summit, and other major initiatives. On first time we've had global meetings on water. That this really might be the moment, as new flows of funds are coming in all of these areas, to do some sort of an open letter to the delegates of, or specifically do submissions into some of the deliberations of the COPs, to see whether there could be some encouragement that a portion of the new funding that will be coming out of these new flows of funds would go through the portfolios that have been structured locally by landscape partnerships. And if any of others that think that's a good idea, it'd be great if you'd speak out, or maybe there's a similar initiative happening on that we could join forces on. So if you have an idea, raise your hand or put it into the boxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Jean-Louis, you also would like to add something?
Yeah, since I was the one putting in the catalytic grant financing, maybe I'll expand a little bit. And in fact, I would really love the perspective of many on the call. So catalytic grant financing in this case really refers to what we're seeing as a missing middle in these kinds of investments. And maybe it's not even the middle, but it's the beginning. So as we know, we have a gap between public and philanthropic finance, which has typically put grants into these landscapes and done really important work. And then we're calling, right, for private finance, right, to be crowded in order to support the more investable opportunities. So that's all nice and good, but the reality I think that we're observing in the field is that there is a chasm often between aspiration and reality of these investments. And they have amazing potential. And I think we see a lot about the potential, ecological potential, economic potential, and social potential of these projects, but they're not quite ready. And so who is taking the risk, right? And someone put in the chat, but who is taking the risk or who is de-risking? And so I think that notion of catalytic grant capital, and it can be called in different ways. Some call it venture philanthropy, some call it revolving capital. I mean, there are different models to do that, are essentially these mechanisms that can help to take the early risk, either with capital that is recoverable, but can be patient, and is risk capital, right, with an understanding that maybe the level of risk is higher than in a more commercial investment mechanisms, or can be non-recoverable, right? And it's, you know, it's essentially allowing projects to have a runway to prove themselves, to sometimes developing the very first feasibility study. And we see a lot in these landscapes that you have these investors waiting on the sidelines to say, where's the deal? Where's the deal? Where's the deal? And then project developers, especially local project developers, just don't have resources to even do a modicum of feasibility analysis. And then, of course, what happens is that they will go to investors, but what they have is not quite ready, right? And then we're faced with this catch-22, which is to say, okay, well, I may not be ready. Can you help me get ready? No, I can't, because I need for you to be ready in order for me to invest. So the catalytic grant financing kind of model really is a powerful mechanism that can work jointly with these more commercial investments and really go hand in hand to look at the full continuum of project development and how different kinds of capital can activate these projects at different stages of development.
Yes, thank you very much, Jean-Louis. I'm a big fan of all these de-risking approaches, and I think we need to have a very strong de-risking approach on everything that is being done in the landscapes. But also what was said in the first dialogue is that when you build these portfolios of actions in the landscapes, some of these actions may be de-risking also the actions of other actors. So having this sort of holistic also approach in the landscape on de-risking is something probably very critical. Kira, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to reintroduce, because I think in some of the previous dialogues we had some rich conversations about what risk actually means. I feel like this context of de-risk is kind of stuck in current paradigm thinking, and part of the opportunity with landscape level finance, I think, is to invite new paradigm thinking into what risk actually looks like. So when we're talking about de-risking projects, we're talking about de-risking the financial risk, right? But there are environmental and community risks that are not actually in the current risk reward equation, but they need to be. And we all know that inherently. And I know that international finance structures this would sound like gibberish probably, but I also think that it's a very important and very real opportunity for us to understand that underpinning the due diligence that an investor does from a financial perspective is what I was saying before, a very, at the end of the day, it's who you're investing in that matters. Like that's the ultimate de-risking methodology, is investing in the right group of people who have the right idea for their community. And I'm not very developed in framing out what that risk reward metric, could look like. I feel like it's an area for us collectively to explore a little bit more. But I just wanted to say that this idea of de-risking, it can get stuck in current paradigm thinking, where what we really need to do is understand risk at a much more systemic level and boldly step into de-risking for our planet and for our communities. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. I cannot agree more, because I'm a big advocate of what I call holistic de-risking, because I'm also struck by the fact that we are always in this paradigm of looking at only financial approaches to de-risking, which is in projects, particularly in land use, where you have risk related to climate change, to diseases, to a lot of natural phenomena. In fact, you need to look at all these risks, and we need frameworks also to help the communities to better understand, anticipate the risk, because if you don't anticipate, if you don't manage the risk, then you cannot take risk at the end of the day, which is also something very important. Any comments also to what has been said so far, or do you want to bring in new ideas, new thoughts to the conversation?
Carolyn had her hand up, I think.
Yeah, Caroline, yes, you wanted to add something?
Yes, so thank you, Sarah. Very well, I was just curious because I think that in the examples, I just put it in the chat, in the examples that we gathered in this blended finance paper, it's lots of times public development banks or the multilateral development banks that are in there for the de-risking. And I completely agree that it's time for a new paradigm on what is risk. So there's lots of indirect or direct government money involved, and I'm just very curious for this community how the contacts are, or how easy it is to get into the discussions with governments to be more active with a landscape solution. I also think that lots of times, especially if you talk about climate adaptation, you might know that we had the big problems that there were in Germany with all the flash rains last year and all the damage, financial damage and human damage that was done. It was like 30 billion, I think, that they all measured. We didn't have those problems then in the Netherlands because we had nature-based solutions and more room for the rivers in the Netherlands. That's why we didn't have. So, you know, thinking about risk, it's also and money. It's also about what could be the financial consequences if you don't do it in a holistic way, in a way that's based on nature. If you do it with hard technology that can't cope with all the changes that are coming our way of climate adaptation. So I think that thinking about risks should also incorporate these kind of ways of thinking.
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much, Caroline. Can I also try to get some thoughts from Sarah Prosser from the Bioregional Weaving Lab in Ireland? I'm very interested in your project, Sarah. Could you tell us a bit also how you see this and these catalytic instruments? You have different bioregional weaving labs, right?
Yes, we do. There are 8 at the moment around Europe. So our one is in Ireland, where I'm working as the weaver of the projects and place and people into this portfolio. So we've been working just sort of trying to build trust and togetherness and get people to develop that common vision. But now out of that are coming holistic concepts of different kinds around the region. So we look not for just projects, but really sort of already each concept is already a complex concept that's coming up. And we're getting them into some sort of common language. We're trying to do it through the 4 returns framework of common land. So we're looking so that they all have a way of trying to describe how their concepts are going to give back both to nature, economics, social returns, but also inspiration. And if we can get these concepts all looking at the 4 returns and we can aggregate them into a portfolio for the whole bioregion, we hope that we can then sort of give them the agency to also say how they want the finance to work. So we'll be having an event in September and inviting some funders, both from public sector and the philanthropic and foundation sector, to come and meet and see how we can bridge that gap. But we're really trying to get the community also empowered to be able to say what they would like to see and how they could co-design it and how they could then perhaps even have co-ownership of it going forward. But we're in a really early stage. It's just all at a very emergent point of developing that portfolio. I can answer any questions. I don't quite know what you were thinking of, but
I just have a quick question, Sarah. When I hear bioregion, I see something that is bigger than a landscape in a way. What is for you a good scale also to work on these issues?
The scale we're working on is about sort of about 75,000 hectares roughly. It's about the size of the county of Waterford, but also bigger. So we're trying to go beyond the jurisdictional boundaries, of course, and let it be defined by nature. But because of the nature of our catchment areas, it's a combination of looking at the geological boundaries for the catchments, but also culture and identity put on top of that. So we make these we're in the middle of making maps where we take both nature and culture, so it combines the community's identity to the landscape. But it'll go from mountains through agricultural areas and the city and out into the sea. So it's quite a big area.
Thank you. Sarah?
I was just going to say I really nodding my head on all the comments that have been made so far, and I'm finding a lot of them discussing philosophy and the work they're doing in their own areas. The question I have is, what's going to shift the system? What's going to make it possible to replicate the kind of thing that Sarah's doing in Ireland or that Kira is doing? What's going to have to change in the system as a whole in order for that not to be a couple of super inspirational people and organizations in a few places, but actually become something that you see across all countries and all places? What's the institutional change that needs to happen? And what can be done to catalyze the movement toward those institutional changes? I'd love to hear from some of the folks that wrote some ideas on it. What will take us there? What will allow us to replicate this innovative work and systematize it to a place where we can be dealing with billions of dollars flowing? As we know, billions of dollars are flowing, but it needs to flow to hundreds of millions of projects that are really small in some cases, or medium size, or need to be connected with one another. I would just really love to see where people think our entry points are for catalytic change in the finance system.
And just to complete a little bit, you can see a number of contributions in the blue post-its embedding landscape in international finance architecture, which may indeed provide parts of the answer that Sarah would like to hear. So who would like to comment on their suggestions here on the blue post-its? So we have worked through existing conventions to catalyze things, ensure support for process and coordination funding. So basically, how do we also ensure that we can work on top-down approaches as well as on bottom-up approaches? There is a lot happening. I'm just to give you, there is $19 billion of dollars that have been committed to the Great Green Wall in Africa. At the moment, nobody is able to build projects to use that money. And so we hear this, but it's very difficult to combine this. So what are your ideas on this? Jean-Louis.
Yeah, and you and I were discussing it yesterday, so I'm just going to build on that conversation. to tee up maybe others' reflections, how do we connect the dots, right? I mean, we have the different levels of scale, and we know they're all needed. And how do we connect them? And I think and this is just a personal observation based on work that we're doing in different landscapes, is that these global mechanisms struggle, right? I mean, they're able to mobilize this large scale capital, but then they don't know how to deploy it, or when they do, they revert back to the old ways, right? Which is to go through institutions that aren't always connected to the people, to the communities, to the landscape, right? And then conversely, we have mechanisms at a local landscape level that don't have the backbone or the capacity to absorb often this large scale capital, right? And so we have this gap, right? And one way, and again, one of the interesting models I think that's emerging out of this bottom-up landscape work is that by starting with real portfolios, first of all, there's content in the container, right? So we don't start with the container, which is the finance mechanism, but we really start with the content, right? Which is what projects do we actually want to see happen. If we can then structure investment structures, investment mechanisms that are really fit for purpose, right? Designed to support this portfolio, but also that recognize the needs of finance, right? So that's where we often have a missing link, is that these finance mechanisms often don't have, let's face it, right? The risk structure, the credit structures, and my partner, Temi Tallis, who is also on this call, was extensive experience in institutional finance, often speaks to that. But we can actually create these mechanisms. And so again, just going back to something I described earlier, in Malawi, in Mount Mulanje, we're exploring the potential of developing a landscape bond that is fully connected to project portfolios. So it's not just sitting as an abstract concept, but will also have to be backed by all the credit enhancements and all the de-risking mechanisms in order to attract potentially tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And those kinds of mechanisms can then go to the multi-billion-dollar mechanisms that say, hey, if you have a few $100 million that you want to invest somewhere, I'm ready for you, right? And by the way, you're investing in a mechanism that already has a project pipeline. You don't have to worry about that. We have a project pipeline, and oh, by the way, we've also created a mechanism that you can actually invest in, right? And so by creating these, the right level of scale, I guess, is where we'd point to, and whether the landscape is the right level of scale, whether sometimes we need to look across landscapes, but just to get much closer to the ground while also recognize the needs of the mainstream financial system, as long as we want to play within the mainstream financial system, right? Which not everybody wants to do.
Yeah. Thank you, Jean-Louis. And indeed, probably we need to learn together. There are a lot of things happening, and we need to collect all the learnings of these experiences on the ground. I would like to give the floor also to Karishma. Karishma, you have also some inputs to this conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, just taking off from what Jean-Louis was saying, it's interesting and it's important for us to identify that there's a transition period for a lot of local institutions to adapt to the financial mechanisms that we're talking about. And very often we don't account for the lack of capacity of these institutions, like Jean-Louis was saying, on just the capacity to be able to take some of this financing in and to effectively and efficiently implement it on the ground. For example, the government of India has introduced a policy push to support 10,000 farmer producer organizations across India who are supposed to come up with a service delivery model to support local farmers and to enhance their incomes. One of our study basically indicates that one of the big gaps that the farmer producer organizations today are facing is just a lack of capacity to understand multiple financing mechanisms that they could tap into. add capital investment to kickstart the process. But also just general lack of capacity in terms of talent that they potentially attract to work in these institutions, their capacity to be able to connect to larger networks and markets, their capacity to be able to engage in income enhancement and income diversification opportunities, which includes value addition for products, or looking at enhancing supply chains of certain products that are valuable to that agroecological zone. And I think one of our key learnings from the process has been that it's extremely important to invest in capacitating local institutions and understanding how some of these institutions function within the larger governance structures of the landscape to ensure that financing is able to create the kind of impact at scale that we hope for it to be able to create.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karisma. I think I see time, and just have a look at also the post and the comment from Samantha, who left also a link to an interesting document, so don't hesitate to look at it as well. But for now, I would like to thank you first for all these contributions that will be, of course, collected and prepared in a final report. But I would like to turn back over to Sarah, who will guide us through reflections on specific ways we can take action based on all these ideas. Sarah?
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thanks to all of the folks who just shared their thoughts with us verbally, but also the very rich materials that are in the first page of the whiteboard. I'm looking forward to getting into those. What we want to do in this last few minutes of this dialogue is to invite you all to move to the second page of the whiteboard, and you can do that by clicking the square in the bottom right corner. It right now should be marked 1, and then you can click to page 2. And when you get to the second page, I want to give you, again, just 2 minutes. We'll try to be silent on this side, but for you to propose what you would like to see happen next in this collection of folks working across the landscape finance system. What do you think we should be doing in the next few months, in the next 6 months? What would you like to do? Are you interested in joining a potential landscape finance community of practice? Or maybe there's one particular theme. Sounds like there's a group that would like to go deeper on some of these issues around de-risking, for example. Would you like to work with some specific landscape partnerships to explore some innovative forms of financing? Are there some activities that you are already part of that are going to be happening in major international negotiations where you would like to potentially invite others who are on this call or in this larger group of people that are evolving, be interested in landscape finance, to work on things? Your action can be small, your action can be, globally huge if you want, but we'd love to have you write down what your specific suggestions are in general for all of us to move forward on. What do you think are the priorities? And then specifically what you would potentially be interested to support. And we would very much urge you to include your name and organization in your comment by any of those ideas. You're not committing yourself to anything, but they're ones where you'd like to receive some follow-up information from others who might be interested in those same topics. So let me give you your 2 minutes now. See if anybody has any questions about the task. Put your thinking cap on. I'm seeing some folks who've been very active in other work. Any ideas on what would help you? And I'm just seeing a note for people interested in communities of practice. Can you put a little note in there about what topics you would like to discuss? Thank you.
Sarah. We have also two hands that are still up, Karishma and Tammy. I don't know if these are for the previous conversation or for this one. Oh, Tammy, yes.
Yeah, Tammy, go ahead, please. Sorry, I wasn't tracking.
Sorry, hold on. Oh boy. Sorry. I'm having trouble with my braille. It was actually more a comment on the previous conversation. Sorry, I forgot to pull down my hand. Is it okay to mention, or do you want to move on?
Sure. No, just absolutely.
Okay, so
maybe link it with what we need to do to respond to it. How do we concretely respond to it?
Okay, so mine is from a different. I was just talking about how important it is to build from the ground up, because when you do that, you're actually taking stock of what the real risks are, because you're focused on the ground up, and you can also identify what the technical spread and technical assistance is necessary, and size up the financial instrument to what is appropriate for the landscape. Rather than coming from the top down, right? So you have a massive bond, you have a massive funding facility, which maybe has elements which maybe the people on the ground can't afford, right? It's at a different maturity level, whatever it might be. So I think when you work from the ground up and when risks are clear, then it affords also the ability to build in elements which could be de-risking, right? And then to test those with investors in a better way, which could lead to much more affordable instruments for the ground, and also lead to more investability for the investor as well.
Great. Thank you very much. I also saw a note in the chat here from our colleague at South Pole, and I wondered if you could say that a little bit, because I'm sure others are feeling the same way. You want to describe that a little bit?
Marlies, are you with us? Do you hear us?
Yes, sorry, unmute button was hiding itself. I think I'm probably a bit overwhelmed with the amount of information to process today, and I've been following the different series, and I think my comment comes from being a very pragmatic person probably, and I would love to contribute, and I'm sure South Pole as an organization that I work for has many relevant experts in different areas and geographies, and also one of the initiatives we are kind of leading on the Landscape Resilience Fund. We'd be happy to contribute, but I think I struggle to define the most meaningful way to contribute, and both in terms of capacities or expertise, but also in which geographies, finding the right partners to support in particular actions. And I think we've got a starting point from, I think, a lot of the discussions today. It's clear that there have been identified a number of key challenges. I think we're getting closer to defining the solutions, but to make them actionable, I think we unfortunately have to go back to that landscape level to say, okay, let's take a landscape, let's look at which challenge are we going to address with what solution, and let's define or maybe even create a working group with the right experts to define that solution and to start implementing it and defining the next steps. And I think that's where I struggle to what I mentioned has got to be more meaningful contributing here in terms of my inputs of the bigger ideas. I think for some of these are probably to contribute to more actionable next steps rather than kind of opening the windows even further. So that's just my kind of personal contribution. I don't know if it resonates with anyone else, but I do feel a bit overwhelmed probably with the scale of the challenge potentially. But I do know there are some great solutions out there, and also I would love to partner with whoever might benefit from our expertise, and the other way around. I think we would love to partner with others who might strengthen our thinking. So yeah. Open arms, but
we didn't play into your comment, but I think it is the central piece. We wanted to make sure with this dialogue that we were addressing the biggest issues that people felt there were in landscape finance. We are talking about a major transformational initiative that's going to take a long time to fully achieve. And I think what we want to try to do with these dialogues is exactly as our follow-up to this, to sit down and think of what are the smaller number of actionable activities that would be the highest value add for the folks that are here and the ones that have been joining us with the other activities. And I think your point about probably prioritizing, supporting the work that people are doing in real landscapes and then learning from one another in a much more systematic way it sounds like one of the big ideas that we would like to move forward. So we weren't planning to get to that level of detail during this meeting, but our plan is in fact to digest what's come out of all three of the dialogues, and we will be then following up with you. And I think Daniel will say a few bits about that. So let me pass that over to Daniel. Thanks to everyone for your comments. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I just in the few minutes that are left, I would like to just also say something which I had in my mind at the beginning of this third dialogue, which is that landscapes are incredible connectors. So first of all, we have seen that they connect the climate, the biodiversity, the regenerative issues also at different scales in landscape. So this is extremely important because we need these connections. We need to break silos if we want also to progress. There are too many silos between forest, agriculture, between different actors, between public and private. And so it's very important that we address these silos because we need systemic, we need holistic transformations in our landscape, in the different land uses, if we want our planet to function correctly. So we, as Sarah said, a lot has been said in the three dialogues. We have started to compile all the information. I note also in the chat, in the post-its, a number of suggestions. For instance, we have more regional dialogues or regional processes because indeed the issues are not the same. A lot of people also through these dialogues have started to connect themselves, and so perhaps this is the best connection that we can provide, have people getting to know each other and understand and willing to do something together. This is also, of course, the objective that we have in the 1000 landscapes. So with this, I would like to thank you all for your rich contributions throughout this event, as well as in the former two dialogues, which clearly highlighted a lot of opportunities. Just go back. Also, we will share very soon a link for you to go back to what was said in the previous dialogues. But also we see that there are still a lot of challenges that need to be addressed. So some opportunities I would like to highlight now for further collaboration for those interested. So if you are interested in joining the 1000 Landscape Finance team, you can reach out to Seth Seamus. So I think the slide, I'm not seeing the slides, but the name will appear on the screen to learn more how to get involved. We will circulate the dialogue recording, the edited chats, some reports and synthesis of all what has been discussed. And from there, you can further share your interests on and opportunities, perhaps for further collective action. And then you can also go back to the Miro board, and the link will be also provided to you soon in the chat. There is a Miro board where we collect everything, including the presentations, so that you can review inputs and resources from the previous dialogues and from this one, and pick up the conversation where we are leaving off today. So Isabella will share the link of the Miro in the chat. And finally, the 1000 Landscape for 1 billion people website, landscapes.global, has lots of additional information and resources on integrated landscape finance and beyond. Thank you also very much to Annelies Withorst from IKEA Foundation and Litul Barua and Deepika Nukala of the Laudes Foundation for their financial and communication support to this dialogue series. Also, thanks to the dialogue organizers, Seth Shemes, Juan Ramos, and Sarah, of course, from Eco-Agriculture, but Alejandro Tias from Common Land as well. Also, Jean-Louis Robadet and Tammy Toulis of Regenerative Development Group, as well as Sarah Leberger and Elko Cage of Rainforest Alliance took part in the preparation of these dialogues. We appreciate communication support very much from Shannon. You have heard from her, from Isabella Klein and Mike Keller from Eco-Agriculture Partners, and the organizational support of Lily Hamilton of Agricultural Partners. So with this, I would like to thank you all very much again, and we look forward, of course, to keeping in touch and to building on these 3 dialogues. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good end of your day.